definition of friction is an action of one surface or object rubbing up against another. Friction has its benefits. For instance, friction enabled you to move freely across this floor. Because if it weren't for friction, you would have slipped and fallen, and if you're like me, very clumsy, you would have hurt yourself. Friction has its benefits. The brakes of your car also function due to friction. The brake and the brake pad work simultaneously. When you press the brake, your car slows down due to the friction against one object against another. Your car will stop, thankfully, when you need it to. Friction between a pencil and a piece of paper allowed me to write this homily. Now, whether there's a benefit to that to you, I'm not sure. We'll find out in about 12 or 13 minutes or so. All right, but friction has its benefits. Move across the floor, use your brakes, and perhaps through a homily. But what about friction when it comes to relationships? Because relationships sometimes involve friction. Friction in relationships means conflict or animosity. Are you currently in a relationship where there is friction? Now, you have to be careful about how you answer that question because the person who you're having friction with might be actually sitting right next to you. So be careful how you respond. But friction in a relationship could be a spouse, could be a child, could be a parent, could be a grandparent, could be a boyfriend or girlfriend, a spouse, coworker, neighbor, or even a sibling. Now, I have 5 siblings, and a few of them are causing me grief at the moment, so there is friction in my relationship with my siblings. But as long as we have relationships, we're going to have friction. That is just simply a fact of life. In our gospel, Jesus tells the disciples about how to deal with friction in relationships. And there are 4 points which I want to cover off this morning about what Jesus says and how he recommends we deal with friction and the point of friction in relationships. The first point is that Jesus says that if a brother or sister sins against you, now they have hurt you in some way. They have caused you pain. Jesus says, seek that person out privately, your brother or sister, to see if you can resolve the issue simply between the two of you. Now, every one of us has experienced pain caused by another person. And I would also suggest to you that we are the cause of pain to other people as well. So we've been on both sides of the issue. But Jesus says that if something has been done to you or something has been said about you that causes you pain, take the person aside and see if you cannot reconcile with that person one-on-one, just between the two of you privately. If the issue cannot be resolved privately, Jesus says, take 1 or 2 people with you. The next step is to bring in a few trusted, recognized people whom are respected by both people, people who are loved by both people, and see if they cannot help you resolve the issue. They can bring context, they can bring civility, and they can bring reason to the situation. Step 3, as far as Jesus is telling us about how to solve friction. And the last one, he says, is if you cannot resolve the issue privately, if you cannot involve it with a few key trusted people, then tell it to the church. Bring it to the greater community. Jesus says if things remain unresolved, bring the issue to the whole church. If the person who has caused the harm sees that the whole community is supporting the other person, the other side, maybe then at that point they will see the error of their ways and be brought into reconciliation with the person. That we have to recognize that it should be rare Rarely should we ever get to this point where, as Jesus says, if they still won't listen to you, let them be treated as a tax collector or a Gentile. Someone who is outside of the community, outside the family, if it's an issue with a sibling or a parent or a child. It should be rare. Generally, you would hope that the relationship would be resolved by that point. So rare indeed. There are times, however, where we are unable to reconcile with someone, and that might be a painful process. Many years ago, I had an argument with my best friend over a tenet of the church, a tenet of the Catholic Church, one of those big rocks that we do not move on. And my friend felt that the Catholic Church had overstepped its boundary when it comes to this particular topic, and I disagreed. So after our argument, we spent 6 years apart, never spoke to him at all. That was a painful and difficult time for me because, as I said, he was my best friend. But through that time, I certainly prayed for him, and I asked for God's grace to help me through that situation. We did eventually reconcile. The reason I tell you this is there is always hope when we are dealing with relationships that are broken, and we have all had them. In my case, I am grateful for the reconciliation and the restoration of that particular relationship. We have to pray for that person, and we have to recognize that we need God's grace in order to work through that. Paul reminds us in Romans 12, he says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That's something that you can control. You cannot control the other person. But as far as it is possible, as far as it depends on you, be at peace with everyone. Restoration in a relationship takes time, and we need to be patient. The fourth point within the gospel for Jesus is that his whole point, his whole story of talking about reconciliation and restoration within relationship is all around unity. Unity in the church, unity in the family, unity among spouses. He says, if two of you agree on earth about anything, he uses words like, where two of you are gathered in my name, unity. Unity in the community is what he is seeking. It's important to remember that while we work through this process, that we call on God's grace, because that is absolutely required, and asking for peace and for healing for the other person. We have a couple of other points that need to be considered when we look at friction within relationships. I'll suggest to you that in order to have a healthy relationship with God, we need to have a healthy relationship with each other. In Matthew 5, Jesus says that when you bring your offering of your gift to the altar, and you remember that a brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift and go and be reconciled with your brother or sister, and then come back. In order to have healthy relationships among each other, we need to have a healthy relationship with God, and vice versa. Jesus' greatest commandment is that we love God and we love neighbor. One and the other, they must coexist. And lastly, the other point to me within the gospel is that we do not judge people. That is not our job. We do not judge people. However, we are required to speak the truth in charity to one another. We all stumble, we all sin, we all fall short of the glory of God. I know I do. But God asks each of us to look out for one another. I don't know how closely you listened to the words of Ezekiel that God gave him in our reading today, but they are incredibly sobering thoughts. Because God told Ezekiel, if I say to the wicked, "Oh, you wicked one, you will surely die," and you do not speak and warn the wicked person to turn away from their sin, from their ways, from how they're living, the wicked person will surely die, but their blood is on your hands, not theirs. We need to look out for one another. We need to speak in truth and in charity to one another. St. Teresa of Avila says that one of the greatest traits, one of the greatest signs of a genuine friendship is when friends welcome being admonished if they stray and commit fault. How many people seek out friends like that? I'm looking for somebody who can hold me accountable, who want to admonish me regularly. I'm looking for people. Anybody? Any volunteers? That's outstanding. But she seeks people out to help her stay on the straight and narrow path as she serves and follows God. She says the action is done out of concern for the welfare of the other and is a sign of authentic friendship. Imagine seeking out people to admonish you if you stray, because you do you is a very common saying in our culture, and it's unfortunate. Friction in relationships is unavoidable, but Jesus gives us a solution to address friction. God desires that our relationships be friction-free, where we are of one heart, one mind, and one spirit. Friction actually can be a positive, a benefit to relationships because it can hold us accountable. So friction has benefits. It helps you move across this floor without slipping and falling. It helps the brakes of your car slow you down and stop you. That's beneficial, isn't it? Isn't it? To write this homily, friction between a pencil and a piece of paper was beneficial. At least it was to me. And maybe to you too. Amen.